to we have already read a couple of topics. So we are going to discuss the topic of the beer, right, which is the last one. But previous to that, let me point out all those topics that we have discussed, isn't it? So where we find out the difference in what tone and setting between a comedy, a tragedy, and a tragic comedy. When we talk about tone, language, comedy, tragedy, and tragicomedy, what do we find out actually? Literature and drama have traditionally been separated or categorized into different genres based on their themes, isn't it? Based on their themes, based on their tone, and overall emotional impact. So, three major genres that are comedy, tragedy, and tragicomedy. Understood? Comedy, tragedy, and tragic comedy. And each of these genres has unique characteristics in terms of tone, language, and setting. Right? Let's go to the first one. It's called as a comedy. What is a comedy? A comedy is a literary or dramatic work that is designed to entertain and amuse the audience. Amuse means that called to make happy, right? It often includes, you can say, light-hearted situations, humorous dialogue, and a happy ending. That is what nothing but the comedy, isn't it? Like I said, that it's used for the or it is designed to entertain and amuse. So that's why we can say that the situations are light-hearted and the dialogues are humorous, and finally, or in our conclusion part, we find out happy ending. Right. The tone in comedy, we find out light, humorous, and cheerful, and playful, and often satirical, encouraging, and uplifting. Sometimes you would find out ironic. Ironic means called as two different situations or understanding, or exaggerated, excessively, when it's praising something or excessively informing about certain ideas, isn't it? So let's talk about that. Example of a comedy, you would say A Midsummer Night's Dream. A Midsummer Night's Dream by William Shakespeare. So in this particular part, you would find out the play is full of mistaken identities, isn't it? So the play is full of mistaken identities, magic, and humorous misunderstandings, isn't it? And the tone that remains whimsical and mischievous, notorious throughout the play. So, and the kind of a language that is used in this comedy is called as a simple, witty, and sometimes exaggerated, excessively when stated. So, even not only that, you will also find out the languages which are used in this particular play. It's called as a puns, wordplay, and sarcasm, criticism, isn't it? And light-hearted dialogues with the banter and repartee, right? Banter and repartee. Uh, Similar to that, if I talk about that, the example of those of the things which are used, you can say one of the examples would be the importance of being honest. The importance of being honest by Oscar Wilde. Oscar Wilde. So that in this particular play, what happened? The dialogue is filled with a sharp, clever wit, satire, and a paradoxical, means contrasting statements. Right. Characters often speak in an exaggerately formal way to highlight the abnormality, absurdity of social norms or social situations. Right. So generally, when we come to the end of this comedy one, we find out the settings, the background. in comedy would be what often takes place in urban, or you can say courtly settings, like you can talk about a city or a household or a marketplace, isn't it? So includes elements of mischief, festivity, and light-hearted environments. Sometimes mistaken identities or disguises that adds to the humor, right? Or that add to the humor. Like you can talk about a drama or a play that you would find out presented with a comedy setting. We find out, the example is called as a much ado about nothing. So again, another play by William Shakespeare. And in this play, you would find out the setting is mostly within the lively household of Leonardo, right? Who is Leonardo? A character, a governor's home, isn't it? So where social life thrives with weddings, parties, and music, isn't it? Now, in that case, what you find out here in this comedy section, we find out tone of the comedy, right? Or tone in comedy, language in comedy, and setting in comedy, isn't it? So, second is called it a tragedy. A tragedy is a serious one. Tragedy is a serious literary or dramatic work that focuses on human downfall, and deep emotions that present in human being. It often includes a tragic hero whose mistakes or flaws that lead to his or her downfall, right? And typically ends with what? Death or destruction. What my point? In tragedy, we are talking about. So, and here also you would find out the tone in tragedy would be serious, sombre, and you can say that melancholic. Serious, somber, and melancholic, isn't it? Intense and often dramatic, filled with sadness, pity, and fear. Like you can say Aristotle's concept of catharsis, right? Aristotle, his concept of catharsis means a human's body. Um, Even the themes of tragedy refer to fate, betrayal, destiny, and the moral struggles. Now, these are the things that you would find out in tragedy, tone in tragedy. Isn't it? When you read that, you come to know that. Let me give you an example of William Shakespeare's written Hamlet. So the tone in this particular play, you would find out is nothing but a brooding, thoughtful, philosophical, exploring themes of what revenge, madness, and existential crisis, isn't it? So similar to that, the language that used in tragedy is called as a formal, and that increased in structure, elevated in structure, that use of monologue, when monologue is called as a one speaker, soliloquy, it seems like somebody who is isolated and speaking with a full of sadness, and poetic devices like metaphors, comparison, direct comparison, and imagery. Heavy use of emotion and philosophical dialogue generally we find out in the tragedy, right? Then let me give you an example of Oedipus, right? Oedipus, Oedipus Rex, Oedipus Rex, Rex, Oedipus Rex by Sophocles. So Sophocles is again called as one of the writer. So his written Oedipus Rex, Oedipus Rex. So this is nothing but an example of myths or tragedy in which the language which is used by the protagonist Oedipus, right? And when he delivers powerful speeches that filled with nothing but a dramatic irony and tragic revelation, right? Or expose, right? So the language emphasizes nothing but the fate and profession, such as you can say a line that is taken from Oedipus Rex, written by Sophocles. It's called as "O light, may I never look on may I never look on thee again. O light, May I never look on thee again. So, revealed as I am, cursed in my birth, cursed in my birth. So, in my marriage and in my bloodshed. Now, this line is indicating nothing but the means of fate. This line indicates nothing but the prophecy, isn't it? So, similar to that, the in tragedy, we also find out the setting. So, setting in tragedy, again, you can talk about often royal courts, right? Or you talk about battlefields, or you talk about isolated places that reflecting a character's downfall, right? So even you would also find out dark, foreboding atmosphere that symbolize fate and doom. Fate is called as a destiny, or doom is called as causing to die or death. Then scenes of violence, war, or conflict that can be found, isn't it? Let's say that taking example of Macbeth, in that Macbeth written by William Shakespeare, you would find out how the setting means the background that sits between a dark castle, a battlefield, and a hell, desolate hell, not health, hell, H-E-A-T-H, that called as head, H-E-A-T-H, that called as vicious juggle, right? So that emphasizes nothing but the mystery is present there. Mystery. Or you talk about ambition, or you talk about supernatural elements, right? So that is what is nothing but indicating as the means, tone in language, tone in tragedy, language in tragedy, and we talk about that called as a setting in tragedy, after comedy, right? So the third one that you would find out here is called as a tragic comedy. When we talk about tragic comedy, what is that? Now, tragic comedy means you can say tragedy, comedy that blends elements of both tragedy and comedy, and often starting as a serious story. It often starts with a what? Serious story, but incorporating that in associating with the humor or a happy resolution at the end of the story, right? So, and here in this tragic comedy, we find out the tone is a mix of seriousness and humor, mix of seriousness and humor. And secondly, it's called the emotional ups and downs, shifting between melancholy and relief. Melancholy means what? Remembering the past or remembering your means one of the event or somebody. Melancholy and relief. Even you find out that in tone in tragic comedy can be unpredictable, right? So sometimes ironic, sometimes bittersweet, right? Sometimes ironic, sometimes we call it bittersweet, isn't it? So let's talk about the example called The Merchant of Venice. When you talk about Merchant of Venice by William Shakespeare, in this particular part or a play, you would find out the play has you can say that tragic elements, right? So what is that tragic element? You would find out when Shylock's one of the characters, Shylock's downfall and the serious trial scene in the court, right? But ends with a what? Humor, fun, and reconciliation in the final act, right? So when we talk about the toning, means tragic comedy, we generally find out it's nothing but a blends of it, mix of it. Similar to that, the language in tragic comedy, we find out that alternate between what? Formal and the poetic tragedy, right? Alternate and what you can say that what? Alternate between formal and poetic tragedy like dialogue and witty, right? Informal informal comedic exchange means that how comedy is exchanged means, uh, between the two characters and in an informal manner or informal situation. So they use they use the dramatic irony to create tension between tragic and comic elements. right, includes symbolic language, sometimes mixing light-hearted metaphors. Metaphors means comparison with serious themes, isn't it? That is what you would find out language in tragicomedy. And I would like to also give you an example of what Waiting for Godot. Waiting for Godot, which is written by whom? Samuel Beckett, the writer, Samuel Beckett, who wrote the kind of a play called as Waiting for Godot, is a tragic comedy. In this particular part, you would find out the language is a mix of philosophical despair. Philosophical despair means called as a sad or tragedy. And also, you would find out informal absurdity, ridiculous humor, isn't it? So characters use nonsensical dialogues. So there is no sense in the dialogues. So nonsensical dialogues that influence both laughter and existential contemplation. Isn't it? Like you would find out one line is given in that Waiting for Godot. It's called We always find something. We always find something. Didi. We always find something. Didi to give us the impression we exist. Isn't it? This is the line clearly nothing but called as a kind of a nonsensical means what you can say dialogue. So even beside language in tragicomedy, we also find out means setting in tragicomedy. And in this, you would find out often the settings are nothing but ambiguous or surreal. When we say ambiguous means confusion, surrealism, right? So representing both what? Hope and sadness. Hope and sadness. So, and it can sit between festive scenes and dark emotional moment, and it combines royal courts, prisons, streets, and wilderness. And these are in a way that mixes reality and abnormality or ridiculous or stupidity or absurdity, isn't it? So let's say that the example of means setting in tragedy, tragicomedy could be called as the Winter's Tale. The Winter's Tale means the Winter Story, which is written by again William Shakespeare. And in this play, you would find out how the play starts in a royal court filled with what jealousy and tragic accusation that leads to nothing but a imprisonment and death. But latter, that shifts to a rural pastoral setting where lost identities are rediscovered and joy is restored finally, isn't it? So in that case, you can say if I talk about the final comparison of these three, what is that? Comedy, tragedy, and tragicomedy. What I can find out that means the tone, right, of the comedy is called as a and light-hearted, humorous, and satirical. Light-hearted, then after humorous and satirical. Second, it's called as means the language is called as witty, fun-filled, and fun-filled, informal, and setting is called as a cities, households, festive environments. That is nothing but a comedy. Similar to that tragedy, serious, intense, melancholic. Serious, intense, melancholic. Languages, elevated, poetic, and philosophical. And setting is called the battlefield, royal courts, dark and isolated places. Isn't it? And similar to that, if I go to the tragic comedy, we find out mixed with what? Serious moments with the comic relief, the tone, then after you can say language, it's called as the alternate between serious and humorous, and setting it's called as a shifts between serious and light location, isn't it? Now that is what means the comparison that you would find out. At the end, what you would find out, the understanding the difference in tone, language, and setting between comedy, tragedy, and tragicomedy that helps in what analyzing various works, variety of works. So variety of works of what? Literature and drama, isn't it? So, and each genre influences the what? Audience's emotional journey. And differently, you can say, point out that comedy, tragedy, and tragicomedy. So, comedy that brings laughter and amusement. So, tragedy that influences deep emotions and catharsis, and tragicomedy that provides nothing but a complex emotional experience, balancing sorrow and joy. Right? And each genre continues to shape storytelling across literature, theater, and cinema, right? Making them nothing but never ending and universally important. Isn't